And action.
Alright, so here I am, Govinda Dasu, and I'm going to be interviewing my world religions class on Resolve God Exists. So I've been getting a lot of criticism on this resolution because you can't turn God into law, but I'm going to do it anyway. So first of all, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Meyer, do you believe in God? And if any of you disagree with Dr. Meyer at any point in this, raise your hand and tell us why.
Oh yeah, I want to reinforce this is a total democracy, and I believe in total freedom for everybody to express whatever their religious views are.
But do you believe in God?
Personally, I do.
Any of you are atheists? Bradley, why?
Why, Bradley?
Alright, we'll get back to you. So, Dr. Meyer, how do you define God?
God for me is a creative presence in my life that is essentially there all the time, and I think I've just been very fortunate in having a religious upbringing and always feeling that there was something greater than me that I could pray to.
Do any of you define God in any certain way? No? Yeah.
I like to think of God as more of like an idea that's like it's a nice idea to kind of live by, but it doesn't have much logic for me.
For me, God is the love between humans. I feel like the love between humans itself, the human connection, is divine. And I know that most of the world's religions are going to disagree with me on that because human love is considered secular, but that's my personal belief. But most people in the US believe that a separation of church and state is important. So, first of all, do you agree with that?
I think it's very important, yes, although I come from Great Britain where there isn't separation of church and
There
state.
isn't?
No. And it's worked pretty well there. I mean, it's not, you could never say that Great Britain was like a theocracy, but I think that when I wasn't aware of the separation of church and state, it was when I came here that I started to learn about the US Constitution that I really started to see that. I think the main differences you see are the close association between the Queen and the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's the head of our church, and then there are so many schools which have a religious foundation. And I know there are a lot of schools around here which do too, but in England, when I was growing up, it was very, all schools seemed to have a very religious foundation, just every single one did, and there would be prayers at the beginning of every single day.
Right. So, if you had to choose, though, between a communist state that prohibited religion completely and a theocracy that institutionalized religion, which would you choose?
Oh, this is a really hard question, Govi, because you're making let Tanya go for that one.
I mean, I know this from personal experience. Like, my parents grew up in communist Russia, and like they weren't religious at all. And I mean, like, my mom says, you know, I mean, obviously communism isn't exactly a good thing, but they said like they still had a really happy childhood and stuff. And you know, I mean, I think if you had to choose one or the other, since they're both so extreme, I think communism without freedom of religion, because then you're all sort of related to each other because you're all commiserating.
Okay, so, and the final question, or one of the final questions is, you believe in God, right?
Yes.
So how do you explain suffering?
I believe that human beings are just created imperfect, and that I'm sure that God, wherever he or she is and looks at the world, it suffers too when we suffer. So that's it's not a great explanation.
God's all-powerful. How can he suffer or she suffer? Yeah.
Okay, I think it depends on the way you define God. In the sense, like personally, I see God as like just like not a person, but an essence that maintains balance. And in the world, to have joy and to have happiness, you have to have suffering as well, because that is in itself balance. So you know what I mean? It's not like the God figure or whatever is like, here, everyone just be happy all the time. Like, you have to have some sort of balance to keep the world.
Okay. And that explanation goes so far as to explain religious wars, does it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, and the final question is, we all turn to dust eventually, right? So, if you believe in a religion, you probably believe in an afterlife? Do you believe in it? Yeah. But But if you don't believe in a religion like Bradley, what's the point in living if you're just going to turn to dust and life is suffering? Do you think that life is suffering? Do you agree?
Well, life is just to live. There's no real point to it, but to like, I don't know.
But it's hard.
It's just like we're alive.
It's hard to die. Like, I mean, it's not something we should choose to do. So society, I don't know if it's a biological reason why society.
Is it something we shouldn't choose to do?
You think?
I think that, I mean, if you want to die, I feel like, you know, I mean, of course, I don't wish this on anyone, but society, like, really discourages death at a young age. But if you think about it, you know, the person who dies at a young age escapes so much more suffering than that could come.
Well, everyone has a choice to opt out, if you think about it.
Yeah,
it's
but
hard to opt out.
Govi said it's not something we should do.
Should do. Society. What society tells us to do. But why does society tell us to do that? Do you think it's a biological reason that we want to maintain our own species, so we're naturally inclined to? So there is a scientific explanation.
I doubt that's why.
You doubt that's why?
Let's hear from June, because we haven't heard from June at all. The great June He.
Personally, I think suffering is just relative. You know, something that I consider hurts doesn't really affect anybody else. So I think suffering is just a thing of the mind. If you don't want to suffer, then you just tell yourself, you know, this doesn't suck. It's actually awesome. And yeah, I think suffering is a relative man-made idea. I don't think there is such thing as suffering.
I'd recommend reading certain books, like C.S. Lewis, for example. I can't think offhand now of some others, but there are many, many wonderful books that have come out of people suffering. If you can actually get through that dark night of the soul, the real darkness, and come through to the other side, quite often you've got something really important to teach other people. So if you think about Buddha, who we studied, he must have gone through a huge amount of suffering, but then at the end of that, he somehow survived and came across from that darkness to produce something new and amazing. So I also feel like somehow the being behind the creation that created everything has a core, a reason for doing some of these things that we just can't ever understand ourselves. But that some suffering is definitely, it has created wonderful things that have come out of it. And everything kind of has, I also believe it has its opposite. This is what Mr. Nicholas has been talking about a lot, like in the Tao, the day and the night, life and death. That we're taught so often to think of one thing as right and the other as wrong. And he's trying to be teaching us about, I think, about the wholeness of it all. So I think that's a very important thing to think about too.
And I guess that's a kind of justification for the fact that like a kind of middle way God exists.
How do you mean middle way God?
Middle way as in a God that suffers, a God that's somewhat human like us.
Yeah, I always imagine that when we do terrible things to each other, that God, who's like a reflection of us, is suffering too, or seeing it but unable to intervene.
So I guess back to the resolution, resolve God exists. So what do you vote, A or nay? If you had to vote on it.
I think one way or the other.
Yeah.
Is there like an in-between?
Raise your hand if it's an A, just like a
To
definite
God
A. Yeah,
existing.
God exists, resolve God exists. It's an A. We have 1, 2, 3. And do the rest, who votes nay? You can choose not to vote.
I can't say all the way to nay.
So Bradley, you're nay. So that's 3, 4, God exists. 1 against, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 who can't decide.
And we're missing David.
And we're missing David.
Yeah, he'd be on the nay side.
He'd be on the nay. But
We can't assume that.
the A's have it, but I think it's a lot more important to realize through this discussion that you can't turn God into law.
Thank you, Govi. Great question.